I think we'll go ahead and get started, and as other attendees have the opportunity to jump on, they can catch up with us as we go along here. I really appreciate everyone taking time to join us this evening to discuss the Batavia Intersection Improvements project. My name is Christine Fife, and I'm with Big Sky Public Relations. I'll be moderating this meeting this evening. I am joined by a few members of the project team that will be addressing your concerns and answering your questions. So we'll go ahead and get started with some introductions. Bob, do you want to start us off?
You bet. Good evening, everyone. My name is Bob Vosen, and I'm the administrator for District 1 with the Montana Department of Transportation. Just want to share with everyone that although I am the administrator for what's called the Missoula District, I am a resident of the Flathead Valley. I do reside in the Kalispell area and have friends and family that utilize this intersection on an extremely regular basis. I want to thank everyone for joining us. Wish we could be doing this in person, but with the challenges of COVID still around, we're going to utilize this method for a while yet. So again, thanks everyone for joining us. Kelly, you want to introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, good evening, everybody. My name is Kelly Williams. I work for MDT Consultant Design Bureau, and I'm the MDT project manager for this project.
Thank you. Jacqueline, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Jacqueline Smith, and I am the pre-construction engineer for the Missoula District.
Yeah, and I'm Scott Randall, and I'm an engineer with the consulting firm Robert Pesh and Associates, and I'm working with MDT on the design of the intersection to address the needs of the community and the traveling public.
Thank you, everyone. I appreciate those introductions, and I'm going to introduce you. Well, I'll let Katie introduce herself, but joining us this evening also is Katie Cleets, one of my colleagues with Big Sky Public Relations. She's going to be monitoring the questions as they come in. So I'll turn it over to her to introduce herself and let us know how that question and answer portion will work.
Thanks, Christine. Good evening, everyone. Again, I'm Katie, and I'm also with Big Sky Public Relations. So as Christine was saying, the whole goal of this evening is for us to be able to answer any of your questions about this project. And the best way that you can throw those our way is to use the Q&A function or the chat. It's at the bottom of your screen. It looks like two text bubbles. So if you click that at any point during the presentation, it will open up a screen where you can then type in your question, and we'll be continuing to answer those throughout the presentation after Bob gives us a quick introduction.
Thanks, Katie. I'm sure most of you are pretty familiar with this project, but I'm going to turn things over to Bob, and he's going to give us a brief overview of the history of this project and a little bit about why we're meeting today.
Yeah, thanks, Christine. And again, thanks everyone for joining us. Just a real quick rundown on the intersection Batavia Lane and US 2. Several years ago, back in the 2014 timeframe, this intersection was identified by a review done by Federal Highway Administration in the area of intersections of concern, and this intersection was identified one at risk for severe crashes. So at that point, MDT did a brief look at the crash trends that we're seeing and identified that a roundabout seemed to be the best solution. So again, that was back in the 2014 to 2016 timeframe. Fast forward a little bit to about 2 years ago, a little over 2 years ago, this project was ready to start moving forward. And I wanted to sit down with staff, the pre-construction engineer and I at the time sat down and had a discussion, and I asked the question, are we sure that a roundabout's the best solution for this intersection? And understand that it's, there's some financial implications, and is there another route that we can go forward with and meet the safety needs of the intersection and maybe save some money, maybe maybe there's something simpler that we can do. So at that point, a study was undertaken by RPA. Scott and his crew sat down evaluating multiple options. And as part of that, we also met with many stakeholders. We talked to a lot of people with the public. We had tables set up at the school. We met with the school up at Marion with people. So it was just a tremendous amount of public outreach took place over that time frame. And we had just a really extensive evaluation of the situation, spoke with the public, identified what they perceived the needs were. We wanted to make sure that we weren't missing anything as we went forward. So after all the data from the public was gathered, as well as a more in-depth engineering review of the process, at the end of the day, the roundabout made the most sense in terms of meeting the safety needs of the project and the operational needs of the intersection. So I guess that's kind of a brief overview of how we got to where we are. And at this point, the goal here is to answer people's questions. And I guess I'll just turn it back to Christine to, if anybody on the call has some questions, I really encourage you to type them in. We've got some additional slides that can help answer some questions potentially, but looking for questions. Christine, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you. Like Bob said, this is a pretty informal presentation. We really want to turn time over to our participants to be able to let us know what your concerns are, what questions that you have. We do have some slides, and we can start going through those slides a little bit one by one as we wait for questions to roll in. But I would encourage you, as you have questions, to go ahead and put those in at any time, and we'll address them. There's not a formal time that we'll be answering questions. So if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask those at any time. At this point, I'll just check in with Katie. Katie, do we have any questions, or should we go ahead and get started on some of these slides?
Thanks, Christine. It doesn't look like we have questions coming in quite yet, so maybe we'll go through the presentation a little bit more.
Perfect. We'll start with some crash statistics, and I'll turn that over to Scott to talk a little bit about the crash history at this intersection.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Christine. As Bob mentioned, when we first started here, that this intersection was originally identified as a safety concern back in 2014. The cause for concern from a safety standpoint was related to severe crashes. When we actually dove into the data and looked at what was going on, we found that there were about 18 crashes that occurred between 2005 and 2017. And while 18, it's not a real high number, unfortunately, a lot of those crashes were pretty severe. We had a fatality, what's called an incapacitating injury crash, a serious crash, and a bunch of right angle crashes too, which tend to be more severe. So that caused us to look at options, at ways to address the safety in those severe crashes, with the goal of vision zero and reducing those fatal and serious injury crashes. So a couple of things I would note from a safety standpoint, we didn't look just at the intersection right at Batavia Highway 2 itself. We also looked at, of course, if you're familiar with the intersection, we looked at the approaches, the nearby approaches to the school and to Kelly Ray's. And really there's just a lot going on if you drive through that area. You can see, at the gas station there with multiple approaches, residents, and so many things. There's a lot of visual challenges there. And as you can see from this map on this slide, there are a lot of crashes coming out of Kelly Ray's. Again, a lot of those were right angle crashes. So somebody, say, taking a left out of Kelly Ray's and turning onto the highway and getting, like T-bone type crash. We saw a lot of those happening at that approach, and then a lot of those happening at the Batavia intersection as well.
Thank you, Scott. It looks like we might have a question. Katie, can you read that for us?
Yeah, thanks, Christine, and thanks for that background as well, Scott. Gerald has a great question, and he's wondering what the diameter of the roundabout will be. So, Scott, could you maybe talk to some of the design details as we have them at this point?
Yeah, the first thing I would kind of caveat is by saying we're still kind of in the preliminary phase, and so we're still looking at how best to get trucks through the intersection and some of those design details. But typically, single lane roundabout like this is anywhere between about 140 to 150 foot diameter. We also, knowing that this is Highway 2, knowing that we have very large trucks, mega loads going through here too, we need to make sure that we can route them through the intersection. So that'll influence our design a little bit. So a couple ways we do that are by including these mountable aprons. If you're familiar with those, that's kind of the light gray area around the circle. Basically, that allows our large trucks to get through the intersection more easily without having to turn. So as we evaluate those large trucks and oversized loads and those type of things, that'll influence our design a little bit.
Great, thank you. Are there any other questions, Katie, or can we?
I was going to add one thing to that discussion about the roundabout, just to kind of go off of what Scott had said. I do want to point out that in the recent past, in the last couple of years, I think everybody on the call is aware that we are starting construction soon on the roundabout at Dern and Spring Creek. And as part of the public outreach and I'm going to call it research that we did at Dern and Spring Creek, we actually put together a two scale drawing, or not a drawing, but we actually laid out a roundabout at the fairgrounds in Kalispell to the exact dimensions that we're going to build the Dern and Spring Creek roundabout. And then we invited members of the trucking industry in particular. We had asphalt haulers, we had loggers, we had farmers, we had implement dealers, we had just a plethora of trucks show up, and we had that roundabout laid out so that they could see what it was going to be like to drive through it. And we were able to confirm that the size of the roundabout, number one, would work for even the largest of trucks. We had one of Knife River brought the longest vehicle that they have, which is a full-length tractor with trailer pulling a pup. It's over 100 feet long in a 2-unit configuration, and they were able to navigate. The driver was able to make a full 360 of the intersection, or of the roundabout, without having to leave the part that was designed for the trucks to be using. So we're fairly confident that the trucks will be able to navigate the roundabout. And the other thing, that if anybody out there has taken a screenshot of this or anything, this is a really high level conceptual design. This is not the final design. We're not sure. I mean, this is a starting point, but we have to make sure that everything is going to fit. This is conceptual just to make sure that we could go forward with the roundabout, but this is definitely not the final design. I really want to stress that.
Thanks, Bob. That was really good additional clarification, especially since they will both be near one another. And with that, Christine, I don't see any additional questions. So if there's any other content that we want to move through, now might be a good time to do so.
Thanks, Katie. Bob, do you want to take just a minute and talk about some of the public outreach that we conducted over the course of the last couple of years?
You bet. As it says on the screen up here, we held 3 public open houses. We had different stakeholder meetings where either myself or always members of Big Sky, but myself and Scott met with all of the landowners in the immediate area, canvassing of the businesses in the area. We also had, as I said, attended basketball games at the school here. We also attended basketball games up at Marion and at Kyla. One of the things that was pretty, that was something very positive that came out of just getting to where we are right now is the fact that we were able to identify the crosswalk as being a really high concern for the school. And that hadn't been identified to the level of concern what it is on that early study that didn't get into the in-depth public outreach phase of it. Thankfully, there have been no crashes involving pedestrians at this location, but as we met with the school, we found out that there had been a lot of near misses, and they actually had video footage of a couple of them. So one thing that we were able to do with that is work with MDT was able to work with our maintenance staff to be able to come up with a process to fund the RRFBs, is what we call them, and that is the lights that are out there on the crossing signs that the crossing guard can activate to make the lights flash to draw more attention to those to that crosswalk. So pretty happy that we were able to accomplish that in a relatively short period of time to help out. But that is just a really short-term fix. It definitely doesn't address some of the key things that were identified by the residents, and one of them is just how do we slow the traffic down through the area?
This is Katie. Bob, I think that's actually a really good segue, because Gerald asked another question, and you had mentioned visibility, and his is somewhat related to that, but he's asking what the visibility will look like, or if we'll be able to see across the center of the roundabout once it's through. So again, another design question, but I don't know if that's a good question for Scott or for Bob, but maybe Scott could take the lead and Bob could follow up if there's anything more.
Yeah, Scott, why don't you address that to start with? And
Sure. Yeah, there's a couple schools of thoughts on that. Typically, when we design roundabouts, we do want to raise up that center island for a couple of reasons. With a roundabout, one of the benefits is you don't need to have as much sight distances as you would for a traffic signal, because when you're entering it, all you need to do is slow down to a slow speed and look to your left. And what we found is operationally and even safety is that when people are able to see too far in front of them, in front of the roundabouts, it actually reduces how well the roundabout works. Because if you're coming up to the intersection, you can see across it. You shouldn't be concerned about the person on the other side of the roundabout. All you need to be concerned about is the person to your left as you enter it. And so we try to balance that a little bit, knowing that it is kind of a comfort level that people do want to be able to see a bit, but also the more you can see, the more you're trying to process, and you're not looking at the things that we want you to look at. So we want to focus your attention on where you're entering the roundabout, the pedestrian crossing, and then to focus on looking to your left. So there's a few different ways to do that into the design. Again, we don't have all those details quite dialed into this point, but typically we do try to at least somewhat, limit that visibility a little bit. Not to say that we're going to put a large fountain or something in the middle of the roundabouts, as some communities have done, that would completely block your sights, but we do tend to raise that up a little bit.
Thanks, Scott. I'd like to take just a minute, if we could. I know it's probably on the minds of several residents about other options that were considered before this roundabout decision was made. So Bob, could you take a minute and just talk about some of those other options that we considered?
Yeah, I will. One of the big questions that has been asked a lot is how about an overhead pedestrian crosswalk or an underground pedestrian crosswalk? And those are, great potential solutions for one of the issues. But one of the things that we want to stress is that the original, what brought the project to the forefront was thankfully not conflicts with pedestrians. So while a grade separated pedestrian crossing would address the safety of the students, if it was possible to be constructed, that would only be one of several of the issues that is being resolved with that. And on that, an overhead pedestrian crosswalk is very expensive. In this case, it would be challenging because there isn't really a good alternate route for overheight loads to figure out how to get around it. Even the county roads are somewhat challenging to use. There isn't a paved road, a great alternate route to get around this location. So, and an overhead structure is really expensive. In addition, there's a lot of ADA concerns. You have to have ramps to get up to that elevation or where the bridge is up and down. And then and these concerns kind of apply whether you're going overhead or underground. You have to be able to get the pedestrians up to that elevation. So if you go underground, that's long ramps going down. If you're going overhead, it's long ramps going up. And the particularly the south side or the side by the wildlife refuge is really challenging because we can't build one ramp that goes out into the refuge. Would have to build two ramps, one in either direction, one to the east and one to the west. So that adds to the cost, adds to the challenge as well. In addition, the underground option, there's a really high water table. So then we run the risk of what's that going to look like? Are we going to have to install some kind of pumping system? Is it even possible to pump the water that would be encountered to get to that level? So those are some of the challenges with that grade separated pedestrian crossing. You know, the most often asked question is, why don't we just put up a stop sign on like it is and throw some raised medians in? Or the next step is just put a signal in and that'll alleviate all the concerns. And the challenge that we see is putting signals on a high-speed roadway is problematic and causes safety concerns as well. You know, one of the things that I like to say is that the most common thing that we heard out here, one of the top things that we heard was we need to reduce the speeds. And it's already at a 45, it's zoned as a 45-mile-an-hour stretch of roadway, and there's a lot of people that are driving much faster than 45. What we see with signalized intersections, a lot of times when it turns yellow, to some people, yellow means slow down and get ready to stop, and to other people, the yellow means punch it and get through it. And at highway speeds, we really see increase the likelihood of rear end collisions because people are stopping, not expecting to have to come to a complete stop at the intersection. They expect the car in front of them will punch it like they want to, and it doesn't happen. And the other thing is we still see a pretty significant number of the T-bone type crashes where somebody may have a green light to make a left turn, for example, out of Batavia in a westbound car for whatever reason, if they're distracted or they think that they're going to subscribe to they have a choice to make. And so we still see a lot of crashes with these types of, with a signalized intersection. So Scott, do you have anything to add to that?
You know, just briefly, I would say, you know, when we went into this, we basically threw all the options we could think of on the table. We didn't dismiss anything offhand. We actually, you know, once we heard, you know, kind of the initial concerns and what we were trying to solve out here, we actually identified 12 different options initially that we looked at. And so those, you know, Bobby touched on most of them. I mean, they included everything from do nothing. I mean, that's certainly an option, is that we don't have a problem out there and let's leave it as is. That was one option. We looked at what if we just realign it, square it up a little bit better, fix some of the access points, make some minor improvements. That was another option. Bob, you mentioned the signal and roundabout options. We looked at those as well. And then we even looked at, you know, what if we relocated the intersection and pushed it further to the southwest, get it away from kind of, you know, the gas station and the school and everything that's there now. So we looked at all those things and we did a pretty detailed analysis, weighing basically all the pros and cons of each of the options. We looked at how it affects, you know, vehicle travel, operations, how it affects safety. Those are number one concern. Non-motorized users, all the pedestrians that cross here, access and circulation to the businesses and school. What are the impacts? You know, how would we impact the lands and the environment? And then funding, you know, is this a good use of taxpayer dollars? And how can we balance the benefits and costs? And so we evaluated all 12 of those options based on all those criteria. And once, you know, when it came down to it, the roundabout scored the highest for most of those and overall.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Katie, do we have any questions?
We do. We have another question from Gerald, and I will just say that I think a couple folks had joined maybe after we had got started. So if you have a question or a comment that you want to share with us, the way that you can do so is by adding it to the Q&A at the very bottom of your screen. It looks like 2 chat bubbles, and we'll just continue to answer those as they come in. So with that in mind, we had a question more about maintenance once this design has been fully built. And the question maybe for you, Bob, at least to take the first stab at, is where will the snow go once it needs to be plowed?
Yeah, that is a great question. And so in my role as the administrator, I supervise the maintenance side. So I've spoke to the maintenance chief in the area, and he will flat out tell you that a roundabout does present some additional work for our maintenance folks to do. But at the end of the day, um, it is something that can be done, and it's something that he fully supports because he recognizes the safety benefits. So I just want to clarify that right off the bat. Where the snow will go, generally on a roundabout, it's still moved to the outside. Our plow will continue to move the roundabout to the shoulders of the roadway, similar to a city or an urban area where you have curb and gutters. In this case, that we in a standard rural roundabout, there's really none of the snow gets moved to the center. It's moved to the outside, and it involves a little bit more work. The trucks have to figure out how they're going to navigate through there, what that turnaround location looks like, but definitely they are maintainable. We've got a lot of them, not only in Kalispell and Missoula, but the Billings, the Bozeman, Great Falls. We've got them even up in Northeast Montana. And as long as we continue to work with the designers and the maintenance folks, get them all in the room, we're addressing those needs, and that is part of the discussion. I will say that as part of our design as well, Christine, if you could go back to the slide that has the mock roundabout or that one, perfect. One thing that we have looked at in there is we've met with the property owner that's right next to Kelly Ray's and addressed snow removal with them, and they're aware of this project, and we've actually had discussions with them and taking that into consideration. Where can the snow go? What's that going to look like? So it's something that we've already been considering and having discussions about. So I hope that answered the question. Scott, did I miss anything you can think of?
I don't think so. I think, some of that's still to be determined. I think, maybe the only other thing I'd mention is that with this design, it is shifting the intersection a little bit to the south, further away from Kelly Ray's. And so right now that intersection is really close to Kelly Ray's. And I know snow storage right now is really difficult for the property owner and for the highway too. And so with its design, we're pushing a little further away, which gives us some more room for storage. And then, as you said, Bob, we typically would plow that to the outsides and not store it in the middle of the roundabout.
Thank you both. Are there any other questions?
Yeah, thanks, Christine. We have a couple that have popped in. So Julie has asked, where will the children cross?
Yeah, I can take a stab at that one. There's a couple different locations. Right now we have the one crossing right on the, I guess, the southeast side or southwest side, I guess, of Batavia, where they cross today, where, as Bob mentioned, we have the newly installed flashing signal out there. With this design, they could still cross at that same location. It would look a little bit differently. Right now, when pedestrians cross, they have to cross 3 lanes of traffic at one time. They have to cross both of the through lanes for Highway 2 plus the left turn lane on Highway 2. So that total crossing distance is, over 40 feet long that they have to cross when they're unprotected. With the roundabouts, it looks a little bit different. Basically, instead of crossing everything at once, we have what's called a two-phased crossing, where you would cross one lane at a time instead of having to cross everything all in one swoop. So as you enter the roundabouts or as you enter the crossing, you would cross one lane of traffic. Basically, you'd come up to the intersection, take a look to your left, make sure a car stops. Once they stop, then you'd have to go ahead to cross into the center median. And then you'd pause there and have protection, and then you'd stop and wait and look to your right and make sure that cars are stopping coming out of the roundabout, and then you'd cross the other location. So you'd actually cross 2 lanes again instead of 3 lanes at once. And As you can see on this kind of layout here, we have crossings at all legs of the intersection, at least conceptually for right now. The other thing I'd touch on, and thanks Christine for transitioning, is, we do get a lot of concerns about crossing for pedestrians at roundabouts and being unsafe and uncomfortable. And definitely, a valid concern as far as being uncomfortable goes. Anything that's new out there, I think, obviously takes an adjustment period. Everybody likes, going up to a signal, you push a button, you get a walk sign, and you feel like you can cross protected, that cars will stop for you. Roundabouts are a little different. It does put a little more of the onus on the pedestrian to make sure the car stops for them versus at a signal where you push a button and you hope they stop for you. One of the biggest benefits that we see with roundabouts and pedestrians is that roundabouts force drivers to go a lot slower at the intersection. With the traffic signal, again, we're hoping that they stop when we have a high speed road. We're hoping that they don't blow through the intersection at 45, 55 miles per hour. With the roundabout, you physically can't do that because we have medians in place, we have curves in the road that force the vehicles to stop. So by doing that, we're creating a much safer environment for pedestrians that are crossing. And nationally, when we look at statistics about pedestrian safety at roundabouts versus other intersections, nationally we've seen a reduction in pedestrian crashes by 40% overall, which is really good. And most of that speaks to, again, the speeds at which, if there is an accident or if there is an incident, a pedestrian would much more likely to be safe, either injury free or at least survive that type of crash. As you can see in the chart here to the left, that a pedestrian that is hit at 25 miles per hour has a 90% chance of survival versus if they're hit at 40 miles per hour, they only have a 10% chance of survival. And so, again, that speaks to one of our biggest needs here of improving safety, making for a safe intersection, and reducing speeds at the same time.
Hey, thanks for that, Scott. I'm going to throw in one other question. And Christine, if you could go back to the roundabout image one more time. One thing that we are going to look at as part of the design, we've got the RRFB in place. We'll probably have a discussion with the school and internally and see if it makes sense to revisit it and possibly try to repurpose that hardware that we have already for an RRFB. They can be used in conjunction with the roundabout for this, particularly this crosswalk right here that takes from the shared use path directly to the school. And the other thing that I want to share is I've already been meeting with the principal at Smith Valley, and I have committed that either myself or Scott or someone, we will get someone to the school to work with the crossing guards and the students to give some education on how to best navigate this roundabout as a pedestrian.
And maybe another thing I'd mention too is that, we do have a lot of instances in the nation, but also in the States of roundabouts near schools. I actually live just south of Helena, and right near my house, we have a roundabout that's near the Montana City School. And every morning I drive it, and my kids walk through it all the time, and I see other kids walking through it all the time. And I would say that the kids, is in typical fashion, are a lot quicker to pick it up than a lot of adults. And actually, we typically get a lot more of that fear and kind of uncomfortableness more from the adults than the kids side. So I don't know of any issues at the one over near my house that I've experienced, and have never seen a problem out there, and they actually work really well for pedestrians.
Thank you both. I think we had a couple of other questions. Katie, do you want to address those?
Yeah, thanks, Christine. Megan has two questions. One, what will the speed limit be? And then secondly, if maybe Bob or Scott could also speak to if a roundabout has ever been built on a rural highway. So I'll turn those over to Scott first, maybe for the first go around, and then Bob maybe add on.
Yeah, that works. As far as the speed limit goes, we don't set the speed limit as part of the project. Typically, what'll happen is we'll look at the project and see how it affects the speeds in the area. Right now it's 45. We would have to do a speed study to see what the appropriate speed would be. Bob kind of mentioned it earlier, but if we just go out there and sign it and tell people to drive slower, that has very little effect on how fast people actually travel. And so Right now it's signed 45, but I know many of you out there have experienced people that don't go 45 through there. And so if we were just to go out and sign at 35 today, people aren't going to drive 35 without some sort of reason to do that or physical change. So with the roundabouts, we typically see a lot slower vehicle speeds because we're introducing physical change that forces drivers to slow down. So typically the circulating speeds that we'd have at a roundabout is anywhere from 15 to 25 miles per hour. And then we generally, like I said, go out there and see what the speeds that people are driving out there and set the speeds in that manner.
And I'll just add a couple extra points on, Scott. Currently, I know that for some people there is some confusion, and when you drive through a roundabout, as you're approaching a roundabout, you see the roundabout ahead sign, and there's usually a speed placard either on that sign or in the vicinity of it. But that is a sign that it is black numbers on a yellow background, and that is not a speed limit. That's an advisory sign. That's not a statutory or regulatory sign. We're telling you that we advise you slow down to 15 miles an hour. That's the comfortable speed the average person can drive through that area, whether it's a curve sign on on a sharp mountain windy road or in a roundabout area. So the roundabout will be signed with those advisory placards, but those aren't a speed limit. Speed limits in Montana, Scott and I don't have the authority to change it. There's a statutory process under Montana code that is very clear on how speed limits can be changed in Montana, and that's through the Transportation Commission, which is not part of the Department of Transportation. It's a body of appointees by the governor that oversees what the Department of Transportation does. So it is a separate body, and there's a separate process to go through. We do work closely with them, but as Scott said, we can't change the speed limit in the area without going through that process as spelled out in statute.
And then I guess to the second point, I don't know if Bob, you want to take that or if you want me to take a stab at the rural highway.
I'll take the first part of it, and then how about you fill in, because you live in the area. So
Sure.
The question of, has MDT ever built a roundabout on a rural highway? We have. Canyon Ferry Road near Helena is a highway that pre-construction, so as you can see in this image here, thank you, Christine, for bringing that up. Awesome. We've got an intersection that Canyon Ferry runs left and right through through the image there, and it was zoned at 65, but a high crash trend. As you can see, it was a two-way stop control. I believe the stop signs were on the north and south legs. And the chart to the left here shows what happened in the 6 years prior to the roundabout. 27 total crashes, 2 fatalities, and 20 serious injuries, and then 8 minor injuries. So this was a extremely high crash trend intersection on a 65-mile-an-hour roadway. In 2009, MDT put in a roundabout, and you can see the difference here. We went from 27 crashes to 9 crashes, but the thing to notice of those 9 crashes, they were all fender benders. So no fatalities, no serious injuries, and no minor injuries. So that's a tremendous success story in an area that it was located at on a highway speed road. So Scott, do you have any other? I was involved in the construction of that project in my previous position, but you live generally in the neighborhood and in the area, may have a little more familiarity than I do.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of other examples out there. We're actually starting to see them more and more on rural highways, mostly because of these trends that Bob just noted, and you can see on the slide is because when we tend to have high crash intersections, we see a lot of those severe crashes again because speeds are typically higher in those rural areas, and so roundabouts are one of the things that are in our toolbox that are proven effective in improving safety, and especially for severe crashes, and so. I can point to, at least a handful of locations across the states on highways. Just north of this intersection, outside of Helena, is York Road and Lake Helena Drive. Very, very similar. It's on a highway. Very similar crash trends as you're seeing here at Canyon Ferry. That just got installed and opened last year in response to safety concerns. We just built one up in Northeast Montana and Poplar, Montana, a couple years ago that has been working really well. We had another one in Lame Deer, Montana, also back east that just was built a couple years ago. That was in basically to solve a major safety concern there as well. So we're seeing them a lot more on rural highways. We get a lot of concerns about speeds and people slowing down for them and everything, but that's the benefit of the roundabouts is it does force people to do that, which has the resulting safety improvements.
Yeah. Hey, Scott, great job of bringing up the Lame Deer roundabout. That's the roundabout on Highway 212, which
Yep.
Is about as far away from Batavia and still be in the state of Montana as you can get. Kind of kitty corner down across the state, but that's a major trucking route. Highway 212 is kind of the shortcut that trucks use when they're leaving Billings and they want to get into the interstate on South Dakota. They can cut through that road. So it has a tremendous truck volume. And we've actually got some video footage on our webpage, and it may be linked through the Batavia webpage, even I think, to that video footage that shows just a tremendous volume of truck traffic, and they get a fair number of oversized truckloads that are going through that intersection as well, and it's been extremely successful.
Thank you both. It doesn't look like we have any other questions right now, but I'd love to just touch on some of these reasons, and we've touched on several of them, but why a roundabout does offer several safety and operational benefits. And maybe we can go through those a little bit. And if there are any additional questions, please feel free to put those in the chat box and we'd be happy to address them. Jacqueline, do you want to take some time and go through some of these benefits of a roundabout?
Yeah, I can definitely do that. Sorry, I was trying to get my video to turn on there. It wasn't working. Yeah, well, actually, Scott and Bob have done a really good job on touching on quite a few of these. So, but I will definitely go ahead and reemphasize some of them. The biggest benefit with a roundabout over a traffic signal or some other features or a stop sign is you just have that physical enforcement there. You just can't run a roundabout. You really have to obey the features that are out there and slow down, and then that allows you the opportunity to observe the area more and watch out though for those pedestrians. It improves traffic flow. It helps direct people with the you're only looking to your left. You only look to your left. It's just more concise and easier to move through. When you're at a signal or a stop light or stop sign, you've got to take in more factors. And so there's just some extra delay there when you're processing all these different variables that you need to be looking at. As far as the pedestrians, you saw the numbers there in that earlier slide. We've got these proven statistics that show pedestrians can get through these roundabouts much more safely than they could any other way. We actually had some survey crew out there earlier this week. They were observing how the intersection is operating right now, and they happened to be there when school was getting out, and so they watched when the crossing guards came up. There's two kids that went to cross the street, and the crossing guards pushed the button for the RRFB, and we actually had several people run the flashing RRFB light before anybody came to a stop, and the crossing guards were able to safely get out there and stand in the travel lanes and hold up their stop lines for the kids to safely cross. So it just kind of emphasized the point for us that you can have these signs or these lights that flash, but and the pedestrian standing right there, but not all the drivers either obey it or maybe they just don't see them. There's a lot of distracted drivers that are out there. We also have the data that shows that the crashes really are reduced. And the bigger thing besides them being reduced is if there is a crash, it is not nearly as severe as other intersection treatments that are out there. We can do the design to accommodate the trucks, whatever it is. That one that was referenced at Canyon Ferry, that one is near a gravel pit, and they're able to safely maneuver through there and not have any issues. Another thing that we noticed that's a challenge at this intersection is that US 2 right at this intersection is really an east-west route. And the challenge you have with these east-west routes is that the sunset and sunrise really impacts your visibility, especially if you're on a north-south roadway turning onto the east-west roadway. And so you're pulling up there when it's in the morning or the evening and you're looking left, you're looking right to cross. And it's really hard to see sometimes the vehicles coming because of the glare of the sun. And then also if you're on the east-west roadway, sometimes you can lose sight of that signal head if you're at a signal, just because that sun is just blinding you. So the benefits of having a roundabout on this type of roadway where you're so dominant on that east-west and north-south is that you don't have to worry about the sun glare impacting the visibility of the roundabout. No matter what time of day it is, it'll always be visible. I'll go ahead and pass it off or give Bob or Scott the opportunity to add on to anything else that I may have missed.
You know, Jacqueline, I think you did a great job. The key points that I would add are just the statistics as you covered, recognizing that we have to do everything we can to design for safety. Nationwide, statewide, numbers are really up this year. It's really troubling when we look at the fact that our fatal crashes this year are over double of where we were last year. We've been in a really good downward trend. Not sure what's happening, but we're seeing it not just in Montana, but nationwide. The number of crashes and the number of severe crashes is just climbing tremendously. So further emphasizes the need that we need to make sure that we're doing what we can to provide as safe a system as what we can for the users. I mean, at the end of the day, everybody on this call uses the system, the transportation network in Montana. We're all affected by transportation every day. We all know someone who's had a severe crash, or people that have been friends and family that have died in traffic crashes. So we're committed at MDT to do everything we can to help everyone go home at the end of the day. As I said, my son's best friend lives outside this intersection. So either he is coming through it to come to my house, or my son's going through it to go to his house. This is happening, you know, for 6 years. It happened on a daily basis almost, particularly during the summer, that these are our friends and family that are using the roads. And so we just need to make sure that we're doing the best job that we can to provide the safest road as possible for all the users. And, you know, just one thing to remember too is that even a great driver can have a bad day, drop something, fumble something, forget that they need to slow down for a signal or whatever. But so we need to figure out the best solution to provide the safest system for everybody out there possible. So I just wanted to just stress that this is it's something that we don't enter into lightly. But we need to make sure that we're doing the right thing for the right reasons.
Thank you both. Katie, do we have any other questions?
It looks like we have one last question. This was going back to the idea of navigability at the roundabout. So Gerald's following up and asking if a larger diameter roundabout would be safer because he thinks that it might give drivers more time and distance to merge. So Scott, I'll turn that over to you and then maybe MDT can follow up.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Maybe Christine, if you want to go to the kind of concept, that's perfect. Thank you. You know, we use the diameter of the roundabout for a couple different ways. The main thing that we do is we use it for speed control, and so we basically control all of our speeds entering and exiting the roundabout through that center island, and then through the islands going into it as well, the splitter islands. And so it's actually kind of the opposite effect as you might think for the size of the diameter of the roundabout. As you increase that size, speeds go up. So you can actually navigate the roundabout at a much faster speed. So if you think about it like as you're, say, taking a left or taking a right around a corner, as you have a really tight radius, a really small radius, you have to slow down much more. Like in a downtown where you have a really tight corner, you have to slow down to 5 or 10 miles per hour to take a corner versus where you have a big intersection, a flat corner where you can take it at a much faster speed. Roundabouts are very similar. Again, we use that diameter to control our speeds, and the bigger that gets, the faster that people can actually go through it. The other thing I would say, as far as the time and distance to merge, that's influenced by the arrival of the cars. And so, if cars are coming in it, and each car leaves 200 feet in front of them or whatever it might be, that space is going to remain the same regardless of how big the roundabout is too. That spacing would stay the same. So it's not going to be affected by the size of the roundabouts. It's really just going to be affected by the traffic volume. So you really wouldn't see any benefits as far as merging goes. But what would you would see is increased speeds if we were to increase the size.
Thank you, Scott. I appreciate these thoughtful questions. Katie, do we have any other questions that are waiting that we haven't answered?
It looks like we are all caught up.
Great. Well, we have reached the end of the slides that we'd prepared, but I want to give the opportunity if there's anyone who's on the call that would like to ask any other questions. We're certainly willing to stay on for a few more minutes to answer any of those questions or concerns that you have, but you should also feel free to reach out offline if you would prefer. You can email me. My email address is there at the bottom of the screen. And if you prefer to ask your questions that way, you're certainly welcome to reach out and email me at any time, and we'll get answers to you just as quickly as we can. But if there are no other questions, we'll probably just stay on for a few more minutes and then go ahead and close this meeting. So if you have any additional questions, please feel free to enter them at this time. Otherwise, on behalf of the project team, I want to thank you for taking time to be with us this evening and share these really thoughtful questions and concerns with us. And we just appreciate the time and your concern for this area and your community.
Looks like Gerald has another question, and this is probably a good one for Scott. Either one, I guess, for Scott or for Bob. But Gerald's question is, will this roundabout become a bottleneck like those on the bypass?
So, yep, I did unmute. Sorry. I'll take the first crack at this, and Scott, you can fill in the parts that I missed. But Christine, if you would go back to our famous example drawing, if you will, there we go, perfect. Kind of to the point that we talked about earlier, because of the flow of traffic, there's a pretty large flow in this direction and a slightly reduced, there's more traffic going east and west than what there is through Batavia. So but the numbers are far less than the numbers at the Foy's Lake roundabout, for example, is where the bottleneck typically occurs. I drive through those in the morning, and then usually in the mornings, both legs or both roundabouts on the bypass. And the airport road really doesn't have the backup that we see at the Foys Lake Road. But the traffic counts on the Kalispell bypass are much greater than what they are at this road. And I believe, Scott, can you help me out with the numbers on this road? Are we looking at somewhere in the neighborhood of 6,000 to 8,000 cars a day on Highway 2 here?
Yeah, I'd say, the total volume through this intersection is about 7,000 to 8,000 cars a day. Yeah, you're about right on that. If we
Okay.
look at like the Foys roundabout, it's more about 20,000 cars a day, so it's more than double out there.
Yeah, I think the last number that we saw, the main line on the bypass is running around 14 or 15,000 cars a day, and Foys Lake Road is running 4,000 to 6,000 cars a day. There's some seasonal adjustments that can go into effect there. But so generally we're running twice as many cars a day through the Foys Lake roundabout as what we are through this roundabout. And then an additional challenge at the Foys Lake roundabout that we don't see as much here. For example, in the afternoon, the greatest number of the traffic is people leaving town, obviously, and coming this way or this way. There is a number of cars for the 20-minute period around the end of the school day where cars are leaving the school and entering in here. But it's really, I don't anticipate the backups like what we see just based on volumes. There could be a little bit of an additional slowdown, but I do not anticipate the tremendous volume backup that we see at Foist right now. I hope that answered your question, Gerald.
And to add on to that a little bit, we do have a bunch of statistics from the Foys Lake Road interchange and the Dern and Spring Creek project that we were talking about earlier, that does compare those. So if you're ever interested in looking at kind of how those different models are set up, as Bob was just speaking to, all of those are available on that project webpage, and Christine can easily send those along as well.
Thank you. It looks like we may have another question, Katie.
We do, thank you. Gerald actually just provided a comment and said, thanks, you've done a good job.
Thanks for being with us, Gerald. I really appreciate these thoughtful questions. It's been a valuable evening for us. I hope it has been for you. If there are no other questions, then I'll just thank you for joining us, and I'll again put up my contact information. Please feel free to reach out if you have any other questions or comments about this project, and we'd be happy to discuss them with you. Otherwise, I just say thank you for joining us this evening, and have a great night.